The crowd's roar hit Henry Patterson like a physical thing, and he stood in the wrestling ring wondering exactly how his quiet afternoon at the Frontier Fair had turned into this particular kind of disaster. "Come on, farm boy," someone shouted from the stands. "Show us what you got." Henry wasn't a farm boy exactly. He owned his own land now, a solid 100 acres carved from the wilderness 2 days' ride from the nearest proper town. He'd come to the fair to sell his surplus grain and buy winter supplies, not to make a spectacle of himself. But his neighbor, old Marcus Webb, had had too much ale and too many opinions about the traveling orc warriors who'd set up the wrestling exhibition. And somehow, Henry had become the answer to a drunken challenge he'd never agreed to take. The orc warrior woman standing across from him was named Draka Ashforge, according to the painted sign outside the ring. She stood perhaps 5.5 feet tall, built lean and hard like a drawn bowstring, with muscle that spoke of years wielding weapons and wrestling challengers. Her skin was the deep green of forest shadows, and when she grinned at him, small tusks showed white against her lower lip. Her black hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her ears came to slight points. She wore leather sparring gear that left her arms bare, showing old scars that told their own stories. "You can still walk away," she said, her voice carrying easily over the noise. "No shame in it. I've thrown men twice your size." Henry considered that. He was of ordinary build, just under 6 feet, strong from farm work but nothing special. He had brown hair that needed cutting, gray eyes, and a face people forgot unless he spoke. Which he rarely did, because he'd learned early that most things worth saying could wait, and the things that couldn't were usually better shown than spoken. "I'm here now," he said simply. Draka's grin widened. "Fair enough. Standard rules. No strikes, no weapons, no magic. First to pin the other's shoulders for a 3-count wins." "Understood," Henry nodded. The crowd pressed closer, coins changing hands as bets were laid. He caught sight of Marcus in the front row, red-faced and cheering, and made a mental note to have words with him later about volunteer tributes. The judge, a portly human merchant wearing the fair's colors, raised his hand. "Wrestlers ready." Draka dropped into a crouch, balanced on the balls of her feet. Henry took a breath and did the same. The hand dropped. Draka moved like water, fast and fluid, closing the distance between them before Henry could properly brace. She went low, aiming to hook his leg and take him down hard. He'd seen it coming, though, had watched her dispatch 3 challengers that morning with variations of the same opener. Instead of trying to sprawl back, he stepped into her charge and dropped his weight, catching her mid-lunge with his shoulder against her center mass. The impact jarred them both. Draka's momentum carried them sideways, but Henry kept his feet, wrapping his arms around her torso in a desperate bear hug that probably looked ridiculous, but kept him from being immediately slammed into the dirt. She twisted, trying to throw him off. He held on, stubbornness replacing technique. She was strong, stronger than anyone he'd grappled with, but she was also lighter than him by a fair margin. When she planted her feet to wrench free, he used her own leverage against her and drove forward, low and hard. They went down in a tangle of limbs. Draka rolled with it, trying to secure a hold, but Henry had spent his childhood wrestling his 3 brothers and his adult years wrestling stubborn livestock. And if there was one thing he knew, it was how to be inconveniently hard to pin. He squirmed and shifted, denying her the angles she needed, until they were locked in a stalemate of grips and counter-grips. The crowd was screaming. Henry blocked it out, focusing on breath and balance. Draka's tusks were very close to his face. She smelled like leather oil and road dust. "You're trickier than you look," she grunted, trying to hook his leg. Henry said nothing, using the moment of her speech to shift his weight and break her hold on his left arm. They rolled again, and this time when they came to rest he had the better position, his weight across her shoulders, her face pressed to the dirt. He drove down with everything he had. Draka bucked and thrashed, nearly throwing him off, but he wrapped his legs around hers and held on like a stubborn root gripping stone. The judge was counting. 1, Draka's shoulder came up. Henry shoved it back down, his arm trembling with effort. 2, another massive heave. Henry felt his grip slipping, his muscles burning. He thought of his farm, his land, the stubborn north field that had fought him for 2 full seasons before yielding crops. He thought about things that didn't quit just because they were tired. He didn't quit. 3. The crowd's roar became deafening. Henry's grip went slack from sheer exhaustion and he rolled off Draka, gasping for air. The judge was pulling his arm up, declaring him winner. People were cheering and booing in equal measure. Money changed hands with curses and laughter. Henry sat up slowly, his ribs aching. Draka was already on her feet, and when he met her eyes, he expected anger. What he found instead was something he couldn't quite name. Calculation, maybe, or assessment. She reached down and hauled him to his feet with easy strength. Then, before he could thank her for the match or apologize for the inconvenience or do anything sensible, she spoke loud enough for the whole crowd to hear. By the old laws of my people, when a warrior is bested in single combat, they belong to the victor. Her green eyes locked with his. I am defeated, that means I belong to you now. The crowd went silent. Then someone laughed, nervous and unsure. Someone else whistled. Marcus looked like he might faint. Henry stared at her. What? I am yours, Draka repeated, and there wasn't a trace of humor in her face. My service, my strength, my blade if you have need of it. The law is ancient and absolute. I am bound by honor until you release me or death claims one of us. That's not, Henry started, then stopped. The crowd was pressing closer, some eager for scandal, others for spectacle. He could see the judge looking uncomfortable, unsure whether this was part of the show. Draka stood straight-backed and solemn, and he realized with creeping certainty that she was entirely serious. He did the only thing that made sense. He looked her in the eye and said, "We should talk somewhere quieter." They sat on a fence rail behind the livestock pens, far enough from the fair's chaos that they could hear themselves think. Draka had collected her belongings from the wrestlers' camp, without ceremony, a worn travel pack, a bedroll, and a sword in a leather sheath that had seen better days. She'd said her goodbyes to the other traveling fighters in a language Henry didn't know, all harsh consonants and rolling vowels, and followed him without question. Now she sat beside him, waiting, patient as stone. "Explain this law to me," Henry said finally. "All of it." Draka nodded. "Among my people, the clans of the Eastern Mountains, strength is survival. When warriors meet in formal combat and one prevails, the loser may choose death or service. Service is no shame, it is acknowledgement that the victor has something to teach, that there is honor in learning from defeat. I have served 2 others this way. The first taught me the spear, the second taught me to read human script. When the term of service ended, I was released with respect and gifts. How long is the term? Until the one who won chooses to release the bond, or until death." She said it matter-of-factly, as though it were obvious as sunrise. Henry rubbed his face. His ribs still ached. "I didn't know about any of this. I didn't agree to it. The agreement was made when you stepped into the ring. Ignorance doesn't void honor." "But I don't want," he stopped himself, choosing words carefully. "I don't want someone bound to me against their will. That's not right." Draka gave him a long look. "It is not against my will. I offered the challenge, set the terms, I lost. This is consequence. You could just leave." I could, her jaw set, but I won't. My honor is all I have. If I break the old laws, I am nothing. She turned to face him fully. You seem troubled. Is it because I am orc? Would you accept a human servant more easily? I don't want any servant, Henry said, with more force than he usually put into words. People aren't possessions. I won't treat you like one. Something shifted in Draka's expression. Not quite confusion, but close. Then what would you have me do? I am bound. You are bound whether you accept it or not. The law exists regardless of your wishes. Henry thought about that. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The fairgrounds were settling into evening, cookfires being lit, musicians tuning instruments. His grain was sold, his supplies purchased and loaded in his wagon. He'd planned to camp overnight and head home at dawn. He looked at the orc woman beside him, her green skin dark in the fading light, her expression serious and unreadable. She believed absolutely in what she was saying. For her, this was truth as solid as the earth. Come work for me, he said. Not as property, as hired help. I'll pay you fair wages, room and board, same as I'd pay anyone. The farm's big enough that I could use an extra pair of hands before winter. When spring comes, if you want to leave, you leave. No obligation, Draka's brow furrowed. That is not how the law works. It's how I work, Henry said. Take it or leave it. She studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. I will take your offer. But know this, I will serve you as honor demands, regardless of what you call it. The debt exists. I will repay it. It was an agreement, exactly, but it was something they could both live with, at least for now. All right, Henry said. Help me finish packing the wagon. We leave at first light. The journey back to Henry's farm took 2 days of steady travel through increasingly wild country. The main road dwindled to a cart track, and the cart track became little more than wagon ruts through tall grass and scattered forest. They passed one homestead the first day, smoke rising from a cabin tucked into a hillside, and after that saw no other people. Draka walked beside the wagon, refusing to ride despite Henry's offer. She scanned the tree line with the unconscious vigilance of someone who'd spent years on dangerous roads. Once she held up a hand and Henry stopped the wagon without question. She stood listening for a full minute before relaxing. Wolf pack, she said, but moving away from us. Henry nodded. They usually avoid the road this time of year. Easier prey in the high country. They made camp that night in a clearing Henry knew, where a creek provided fresh water and a circle of stones showed where travelers had built fires before. Draka insisted on taking first watch despite the long day's walk. Henry was too tired to argue. He rolled himself in his blanket and fell asleep to the sound of water and crackling flames. He woke once in the deep night, some instinct pulling him from dreams. Draka sat by the rebuilt fire, her sword across her knees, her eyes reflecting the firelight like an animal's. She didn't look at him, but she spoke quietly. Sleep. All is well, he did. The second day brought them to Patterson land. Henry felt the familiar easing in his chest as they crossed the boundary marker, a cairn of stones he'd built himself 3 years ago. The track here was his alone, worn by his wagon and no one else's. The forest gave way to cleared fields, golden with harvested grain stubble. The north field showed dark earth where he'd turned it over for winter rest. And there, nestled in a gentle valley with the creek running silver beside it, was his cabin. It wasn't much. One main room with a sleeping loft, a stone fireplace, sturdy walls of chinked logs. A barn stood nearby, built this past spring, and beside it a chicken coop and small paddock. The vegetable garden had been harvested down to the root vegetables, and he could see the pumpkins he'd left ripening on the vine, huge and orange in the fading light. Draka stopped, taking it in. This is yours, all of it, 100 acres. Claimed it after I left the army, built it up since. He didn't mention that he'd done it alone, that he'd chosen this remote location specifically because it meant fewer people and fewer words needed. She could probably guess. You were a soldier. 5 years. Got my land grant when I mustered out. He clicked to the horses, guiding them toward the barn. It's not fancy, but it's solid, weather tight. You'll sleep in the loft if that suits you, or I can clear space in the barn. The loft is generous. They unhitched the horses together in the gathering dusk, working in comfortable silence. Draka moved efficiently, clearly familiar with the work. She hauled water from the creek for the animals while Henry forked out feed. By the time full dark fell, they'd unloaded the wagon and secured everything properly. Inside, Henry built up the fire and set water to boil for tea. Draka climbed the ladder to inspect the loft, a space that ran the length of the cabin and held Henry's winter stores, his spare tools, and a pallet that had been his bed before he'd built the better one below. "This will do well," she called down. "More space than I'm accustomed to." Henry pulled out bread and cheese, dried meat and apples. They ate at his small table, the fire popping and settling. Outside, an owl called. The cabin creaked in the way of settling wood. "What work do you need done?" Draka asked, brushing crumbs from her hands. "Firewood's the priority. I've got timber cut and stacked for splitting. Need enough to last the winter, and I'm behind where I'd like to be. After that, the north field needs stone picked before I can plant it properly come spring. Fences to mend, the usual things." He paused. "You know farm work, I know labor." "I'll learn what I don't know." She met his eyes. "I meant what I said about the debt. I will work as hard as you need." "I'll work beside you," Henry said. "This isn't master and servant. It's two people getting things done." Draka looked like she wanted to argue, but instead she just nodded. "As you say." They fell into a routine over the following days that felt older than it was, worn smooth like a favorite tool. Henry woke before dawn, as always, and found Draka already awake, tending the fire or hauling water. They ate a quick breakfast of porridge or fried mush, then worked until the light failed. The firewood became Draka's particular domain. Henry showed her how he wanted it done: logs split to a certain size, stacked to allow air flow, kept under cover of the lean-to he'd built against the barn. She took to it with fierce efficiency, swinging the splitting maul with a precision that spoke of deep familiarity with heavy blades. Her form was flawless. The pile of split wood grew with gratifying speed. Henry worked the north field, dragging stones into cairns, breaking up the larger rocks with hammer and wedge. It was brutal, monotonous work, but necessary. Every stone removed was a stone his plow wouldn't break against. He lost himself in the rhythm of it, the swing and strike, the solid resistance giving way. They met at midday to eat whatever simple meal they'd prepared the night before. Draka asked questions about the farm, the land, what grew well and what didn't. Henry found himself talking more than he usually did, explaining crop rotation and soil quality, the problems with the creek flooding in spring, his plans for a second field next year. "You built all this alone?" Draka asked one day, sitting on a stone they'd just hauled from the earth. "Mostly. Had help raising the barn beams, but the rest, yes." "Why here? Why so far from others?" Henry shrugged. "Quiet. After the army, I wanted quiet." She understood that, he could tell. She didn't press. The evenings were when things felt strangest. They sat by the fire, too tired for more work, and the silence stretched between them. Draka often cleaned and oiled her sword, the rasp of whetstone on steel a rhythmic sound. Henry mended tools or worked on tack repair, small tasks that needed doing. Sometimes he read from one of his 3 books, a farming manual, a book of history, and a collection of old poems his mother had given him. Draka watched the first time, her eyes tracking the pages with interest. "You read well," she said. "My mother was a teacher. She made sure we all learned." He paused. "You said someone taught you human script." "The second warrior I served, a mercenary captain named Thorn. He said ignorance was a liability." She hesitated. "I can read simple things, slowly." Henry pulled down the book of poems. "Want me to teach you more?" She looked startled. "That would be, yes, if you're willing." So they added that to the evenings. Henry would read a passage, then have Draka read the same passage aloud. She stumbled over the words at first, but her determination was absolute. She practiced the same lines until they came smooth, her accent turning the human words into something almost musical. A week became 2. The woodpile reached the level Henry had hoped to achieve by first snow. The north field was half cleared, better than it had ever been. The weather held clear and cool, autumn settling deep. Draka began to relax in small, almost invisible ways. She smiled more readily. She offered opinions on the work without being asked. Once, when Henry accidentally kicked over the water bucket and swore, she laughed, a sound so surprised and genuine it made him grin despite his wet boots. "I didn't know you knew those words," she said. "Army vocabulary. I try not to use it. It suits you better than silence sometimes." He considered that. Maybe. They worked on a fence that afternoon, replacing rotted posts along the paddock. Draka held the new posts steady while Henry tamped earth around them. The work was companionable, easy. Henry found himself aware of her in ways that had nothing to do with her being orc or bound by ancient laws. The way she hummed tunelessly while she worked. The efficiency of her movements. The fact that she anticipated what he needed before he asked. The way you could only do with someone you'd worked beside long enough to learn their rhythms. "Tell me about the army," she said suddenly, "if you're willing." Henry finished tamping the post before answering. "Not much to tell. I enlisted young. Spent 5 years on the northern border keeping back raiders and settling disputes. Learned to follow orders, sleep in mud, and stay alive. When my time was up, I took my grant and left." "Did you see much fighting?" "Enough." He didn't elaborate. The memories were old and dark, and he'd made his peace with them by leaving them undisturbed. Draka accepted that. "I understand. Some things don't improve with speaking. What about you? How does an orc warrior end up wrestling at frontier fairs?" She was quiet long enough that he thought she wouldn't answer. "Then, my clan was destroyed. A rival clan, a dispute over territory that became blood feud. I was away, serving my second term of honor debt. When I returned, there was nothing left. No family. No home." Her voice stayed level, but her hands tightened on the post. "The traveling fighters took me in. It's poor work compared to true battle, but it's honest, and I'm very good at it." "I'm sorry," Henry said, "about your clan. It was 3 years ago. The wound is old, but not healed," Henry thought. He knew about old wounds. "For what it's worth, you're welcome here as long as you want to stay." Draka looked at him, something complicated in her expression. "You're a strange man, Henry Patterson, so I've been told." They finished the fence as the sun set, the posts solid and true. Walking back to the cabin, Draka's shoulder brushed his, and neither of them moved away. The first hard frost came in late October, turning the grass white and crackling underfoot. Henry woke to find Draka already outside, staring at the transformed landscape with something like wonder. "We get frost in the mountains," she said when he joined her, "but not like this. Not so beautiful." The fields glittered like they'd been scattered with diamonds. The creek steamed where it ran over stones. Henry's breath plumed white, and beside him, Draka's did the same. "It'll melt by midday," he said. "But there'll be more. Real snow's not far off." They spent that day winterizing, stuffing fresh chinking in the cabin walls, checking the barn roof for leaks, moving the chickens' roosts away from drafts. Draka proved surprisingly good with the animals, her hands gentle despite their strength. The hens, usually skittish, tolerated her without complaint. "You have a way with them," Henry observed. "Small things trust when you're patient. It's the large ones that give trouble." She scattered feed with practiced efficiency. "These will keep laying through winter. If we keep them warm and fed, we'll get a few eggs. Not like spring, but enough." That evening, Henry made stew from the last of the garden vegetables and a rabbit Draka had snared. She'd asked permission before setting snares on his land, another small thing that spoke to her sense of honor. The stew filled the cabin with rich smells, and they ate it with dark bread Henry had baked 2 days prior. "I've been thinking," Draka said, sopping up broth with bread. "Winter's coming fast. You'll need wood for carving and repairs. I could fell some trees in the back section where you said you wanted to clear for pasture anyway." "That's heavy work. I'm strong, and I know my way around an axe," she paused. "Unless you'd rather do it yourself." "No, that's good thinking. We'll do it together. Safer with 2 people anyway," she nodded, satisfied. Then, after a moment, "Henry." "Yes. Why do you never give me orders, even simple ones? You ask or you suggest, but you never command." He thought about that, turning his cup in his hands. "Because you're not mine to command, I told you that at the start. But your debt is to yourself and your honor, not to me. I didn't ask for it." He met her eyes. "You want to work off some obligation you think you owe, fine. Work. But you're free here, Draka. I'm not going to take that from you." She stared at him, her expression unreadable in the firelight. Finally, quietly, she said, "You really mean that?" "Yes. I don't understand you, that's all right. I don't understand myself half the time." He smiled slightly. "We'll figure it out as we go." Something eased in Draka's face, a tension he hadn't fully noticed until it was gone. "All right," she said. "We'll figure it out." The first snow fell a week later, soft flakes drifting down through gray skies. It accumulated slowly, dusting the world in white. Draka stood outside watching it, her face turned up to the sky, and Henry felt something shift in his chest. Something warm and complicated that he didn't have words for. He went back inside and started planning what needed doing before the deep cold set in. November brought winter in earnest. The snow that had started as a dusting became serious, piling in drifts against the barn and turning the fields into unmarked expanses of white. Henry and Draka settled into the enforced closeness of people weathering hard months together. They worked when they could. Draka felled trees at the edge of the back property, and Henry helped her limb and section them. The trunks they'd leave to season until spring, but the branches became kindling, and the straightest pieces became lumber for future projects. On the worst days, when the wind howled and the snow fell so thick you couldn't see the barn from the cabin, they stayed inside and worked on indoor tasks. Henry carved handles for tools, his knife moving in careful, practiced strokes. Draka learned to spin thread from the wool he'd stored, her strong hands surprisingly delicate on the spindle. She was clumsy at first, the thread coming out uneven, but she persisted with the same stubbornness she brought to everything. By the second week, her thread was decent. By the third, it was good. "You're a quick study," Henry said, watching her work. "I've had to be. Life doesn't wait for slow learners." The reading lessons continued. Draka worked through the book of poems, and when she'd mastered that, Henry brought out the history book. She devoured it, asking questions about the human kingdoms, the wars and treaties, the way power flowed between regions. Her mind was sharp and curious, and Henry found himself enjoying the discussions more than he'd expected. "Your people have so many laws," she said one night, looking up from a passage about royal succession. So many rules about who can rule and why. It seems unnecessarily complicated. It probably is, but I think that's humans for you. We like to make things complicated. Orcs keep it simple. The strongest leads. When they're no longer the strongest, someone else takes their place. That's its own kind of complicated, though, isn't it? Always having to prove yourself, never resting. Draka considered that. Yes, she said slowly, I suppose it is. The cabin felt smaller as the weeks passed, but not in a bad way. More like they'd both expanded to fill the space that existed, their lives overlapping in 100 small ways. Draka learned where Henry kept things and put them back without being asked. Henry learned that she liked her tea strong and her mornings quiet. They developed a pattern of movement around each other that was almost like a dance, each instinctively aware of where the other was. Henry tried not to think too hard about what that meant. December came in with a blizzard that lasted 3 days. They were trapped inside, venturing out only to tend the animals and haul more wood. The third day, cabin fever set in hard. Draka paced like a caged animal, restless and tense. I need to move, she said. Truly move. I feel like I'm going to crawl out of my skin. Henry understood that. Wrestling match, she turned to him, surprised. What? You're a warrior. You need to fight sometimes, even if it's just for practice. I'm game if you are. We'll move the table, put down some blankets so we don't break anything. No holds barred, first to pin wins. Draka's eyes lit up. You're serious. Unless you're afraid I'll get lucky again. That got him a grin that showed her tusks. You're on. They moved the furniture and laid out blankets. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, they circled each other, both grinning like fools. Draka moved first, and this time Henry was ready for her speed. He wasn't ready for how much she'd been holding back at the fair. She hit him like a falling tree, taking him down hard, and they rolled across the floor in a tangle. Henry managed to hook her leg and reverse their positions, but she twisted like a snake and escaped. They grappled, broke apart, came together again. It was brutal and exhausting and more fun than Henry had had in years. Draka was laughing, her eyes bright with joy, and he realized he was laughing too. She got him in a hold that probably should have ended it, but he was stubborn and squirmed free. He nearly had her pinned twice, but she was too quick, too well trained. In the end, she won, leveraging her superior skill to trap him in a hold he couldn't break. She counted to 3, then released him, both of them gasping and grinning. You've gotten better, she said, breathing hard. You're still better. Yes, but that was actually a challenge this time. She sat back, her hair coming loose from its braid. Thank you, I needed that. Any time. They put the cabin back together, both moving easier now, the restlessness burned away. That night, sitting by the fire, Draka spoke quietly. I'm glad I lost that match at the fair. Henry looked up from the wood he was carving. Yes, this life, this place, it's better than the road, better than fighting strangers for coins. She met his eyes. You've given me something I didn't know I was missing. What's that? A home. Henry's chest tightened. He wanted to say something, to tell her that she'd given him something too, that the cabin felt less empty with her in it, that he looked forward to mornings because she'd be there. But the words stuck, too big and too complicated. Instead, he said, you'll always have a place here, as long as you want it. Draka smiled, soft and genuine. I know. The moment stretched between them, warm and fragile. Then the log in the fireplace cracked loud as a gunshot, and they both jumped. Draka laughed, and the moment passed, but the warmth of it lingered. Winter deepened. The snow piled higher. And inside the cabin, something was growing that neither of them had quite named yet. On the winter solstice, Henry made a special dinner. Nothing fancy, just a good venison roast with turnips and carrots, but he put effort into it. He'd been saving a bottle of honey wine from the fair, and he brought it out now, pouring them each a cup. "What's the occasion?" Draka asked. "Shortest day of the year. Tomorrow the light starts coming back. Seemed worth marking." They ate by firelight, the cabin warm and snug against the cold. The wine was sweet and strong, and Henry felt it loosen something in his chest. "Tell me about your family," Draka said. "You mentioned brothers. What else?" "3 brothers, all older. A mother who taught school. Father died when I was young, farm accident. My brothers all stayed in the town where we grew up, took over the family trade, blacksmithing." He smiled slightly. "I was supposed to be the one who stayed close, took care of our mother. Instead, I joined the army and moved to the edge of nowhere." "Does your mother resent that?" "No, she understood. She always understood when people needed to find their own way." He paused. "She died while I was serving. Got a letter from my eldest brother. By the time I could get leave to go back, she'd been buried 2 months. I'm sorry." "Me too, but I think she knew I loved her. I hope she did." He took a drink. "What about you? You said your clan was destroyed. Do you have anyone left?" "No one I know of. Perhaps distant cousins, scattered among other clans. But the people I knew, the people who raised me, they're gone." Her voice was steady, but her hand tightened around her cup. "My mother was the clan's hunt leader. My father was a weaponsmith. I had 2 younger siblings, a brother and a sister. The attack took them all." "I'm sorry," Henry said, meaning it deeply. "So am I." She was quiet for a moment. "But I carry their memory. That's what we do, we who survive. We carry the dead with us and live well in their honor." "That's a good way to see it." They drank in silence. Outside, the night was clear and cold, stars brilliant overhead. Inside, the fire burned steady. "Henry," Draka said softly, "thank you for this. For all of this. You didn't have to take me in, didn't have to treat me with kindness. You could have sent me away at the fair. Wouldn't have been right. Most people don't care about right, not when it costs them something." Henry met her eyes. In the firelight they were deep and warm, and looking into them made his heart do complicated things. "You haven't cost me anything, Draka. You've been nothing but help and good company. I'm glad you're here." Something shifted in her expression. She leaned forward slightly, and Henry found himself doing the same, drawn like iron to lodestone. The space between them narrowed. He could see the fine details of her face, the way her tusks curved, the small scar above her left eyebrow, the exact shade of her eyes. Then a log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks, and they both pulled back. Draka looked away first, her cheeks darker green than usual. "I should sleep," she said, standing quickly. "Long day tomorrow." "Right, yes, sleep well." She climbed to the loft, and Henry sat by the fire a long time after, thinking about moments and chances and things he didn't have words for. January brought a thaw, the snow melting into slush and mud. It was too early, too warm, and Henry knew they'd pay for it with worse weather later. But for now, it meant they could get outside properly, could work on projects that had waited. They repaired the chicken coop's roof, which had developed a leak. They cleared snow from the barn roof before the weight could cause problems. They walked the fence line, checking for damage, and found a section where a fallen branch had taken down 3 posts. They spent a full day fixing it, working in companionable silence broken by occasional observations about the work. "You're going to need more chickens come spring," Draka said, hammering a post. "You've got space for twice what you have." "I know." "Planning to buy pullets at the fair if they have good stock." "The fair," Draka's hammering slowed. "That's where we met." "It is." "Will you compete in the wrestling again?" Henry laughed. "Absolutely not. Once was more than enough. Pity. I'd like to see you try against some of the others." "You've gotten better with our practice matches." They'd made the wrestling a regular thing, once or twice a week when the mood struck. Draka won more often than not, but Henry was learning, his farm strength finding direction under her unconscious teaching. He'd even won a few matches, though he suspected she'd let him. "Maybe," he said. "We'll see." The thaw lasted a week, then the cold came roaring back with a vengeance. The temperature dropped so fast that the melted snow froze into treacherous ice. They stayed close to the cabin, burning through firewood at an alarming rate, grateful for Draka's efforts in the fall. Trapped inside again, they fell into easy conversation. Draka told him about the mountains where she'd grown up, the high peaks and deep valleys, the way whole clans would gather for the summer festivals. Henry told her about his brothers, about growing up in a house full of noise and argument and laughter. They swapped stories like merchants trading goods, each offering pieces of themselves. "I miss it sometimes," Draka admitted. "The community, being part of something larger than myself. The road is lonely, even among the other fighters." "I came out here for the loneliness," Henry said. "Needed it after the army. All those people, all that noise. But I'll admit it's been good having company, having you." Draka's hand found his where it rested on the table between them. Her fingers were warm, calloused from work. "I'm glad," she said simply. Henry turned his hand over, lacing his fingers with hers. They sat that way for a long moment, the fire crackling. The world shrunk down to just this cabin, this moment, this connection. "Draka," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something, all right. The debt you think you owe me, I want you to forget about it. Not because you haven't worked hard enough. You have. But because I don't want that between us anymore. I want," he paused, gathering courage, "I want you to stay because you want to, not because some old law says you have to. And if you want to leave, I want you free to do that too." Draka's hand tightened on his. "And if I don't know what I want, then take your time figuring it out. No pressure, no obligation." She was quiet for a long time, her thumb tracing patterns on the back of his hand. Finally, she said, "What do you want, Henry?" It was the question he'd been avoiding asking himself, but now that she'd spoken it aloud, the answer was clear. "I want you to stay, not as hired help or someone bound by honor, but as my partner, in the farm, in life, if you'll have me." Draka's eyes widened. "You mean that, truly?" "Yes, but I'm orc. People will talk, they'll say terrible things. Let them. I stopped caring what most people think a long time ago. Your family would want me happy. And you make me happy, Draka, happier than I've been in years, maybe ever." She stood abruptly, and for a heart-stopping moment, Henry thought he'd ruined everything. Then she pulled him to his feet and kissed him. It was clumsy at first, their tusks requiring navigation, but they figured it out. Her lips were soft despite her strength, and she tasted like the tea they'd been drinking. Henry's hand came up to cup her face, and hers gripped his shoulders, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Draka pressed her forehead to his. "I want to stay," she whispered. "I choose to stay, not because of debt or honor, but because I love you, Henry Patterson." His heart felt too large for his chest. "I love you too." They stood there, holding each other, while outside the wind howled and inside the fire burned low. Eventually they moved to sit together, Draka curled against Henry's side on the bench, his arm around her shoulders. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Everything that mattered had been said. That night, Draka didn't climb to the loft. Henry offered to take the loft himself to give her his bed, but she just pulled him down beside her, and they slept wrapped in each other's arms, warm and safe while the winter raged outside. February brought a late-season blizzard that buried the farm in fresh snow. Henry and Draka took turns digging paths to the barn and coop, keeping the animals fed and safe. The work was exhausting, but they did it together, and somehow that made it lighter. The evenings took on a different quality now. They sat closer, touched more freely, stole kisses between tasks. Draka's laugh came easier, and Henry found himself smiling for no reason except that she was there. The cabin that had felt empty for so long was full now, brimming with warmth and life and love. They made plans for spring. Draka wanted to plant a proper vegetable garden, bigger than what Henry had managed alone. Henry wanted to build a small forge, nothing elaborate, but enough to handle basic blacksmithing, a skill he'd learned from his father and brothers but rarely used. Together, they sketched ideas in the margins of the farming manual, dreaming out loud. "We could get a cow," Draka said one evening. "You've got the pasture for it once we clear the back section. Milk and butter would be good, cheese too if we can manage it. I can make cheese. My mother taught me." A shadow crossed her face at the memory, but it passed. "I'd like to do that again. Then we'll get a cow." They talked about the fair, about whether they'd go together this spring. Draka worried about the reaction, about people seeing them as a couple. Henry understood the fear but didn't share it. "If people have a problem, that's their problem," he said firmly. "We're not doing anything wrong. We're two people who found each other and chose each other. That's worth more than 100 small minds and their opinions." Draka kissed him for that, fierce and grateful. The days began to lengthen, the sun's arc climbing higher. By late February, there were moments of genuine warmth, hints of the spring to come. The snow started its slow retreat, revealing the brown earth beneath. Draka began taking walks around the property, scouting the boundaries, making plans. Henry watched her from the cabin door one afternoon, her figure dark against the melting snow, and felt a contentment he'd never expected to find. This life, this woman, this quiet homestead at the edge of the wild, it was everything he'd needed without knowing he needed it. That night he brought it up. "I was thinking about the wrestling debt." Draka looked up from the sock she was darning. "What about it?" "I want to formally release you, the way your custom demands, so there's no question, no lingering obligation." "Henry, you don't need to, I know. But I want to, for your peace of mind if nothing else." "What do I need to do?" She set aside the darning, her expression serious. "It's simple. You speak the words of release before witnesses or before your household gods if you have none. You say that the debt is paid, that I am free of all obligation, that I may go or stay as I choose. I don't have household gods, but I have you and I have my word. Will that do?" "It will." They stood facing each other in the firelight. Henry took her hands in his, feeling the moment's weight. "Draka Ashforge, I release you from all debts incurred by our match last autumn. You are free of obligation, free to go or stay as you choose, free to make your own path." He paused, then added, "And I hope more than anything that your path runs alongside mine." Draka's eyes shone. "Henry Patterson, I hear your words and accept my freedom. And I freely choose to stay with you, not as debtor or servant, but as your partner and your love." "Then it's done." "Then it's done," she echoed. They sealed it with a kiss, and when they broke apart, Draka was smiling through tears. "Thank you," she said. "You don't know what this means to me." "I think I do." They held each other for a long time, the fire burning low, the last bonds of obligation transformed into freely given love. March arrived with the promise of spring. The snow melted in earnest, the creek running high and fast with runoff. The first brave shoots of green appeared in the cleared fields. Draka found a patch of wild onions by the creek and brought them back in triumph. Henry tapped the maple trees on the south edge of his property, and they spent a week boiling sap into syrup, the sweet steam filling the cabin. The chickens began laying more regularly. Draka repaired the coop's nesting boxes, making them more comfortable, and the hens rewarded her efforts with steady production. They celebrated with a massive omelet, eating until they were uncomfortably full. We should set some eggs aside for hatching, Draka said. Build up the flock naturally rather than buying birds. Good idea. You know how to do that. I can figure it out. Can't be that complicated. It turned out to be more complicated than expected, but Draka was nothing if not determined. She built a small brooding box, lined it carefully, and tended the eggs with the same fierce attention she brought to everything. Henry caught her talking to them sometimes, encouraging them to hatch strong. "They're eggs," he said, amused. "They can't hear you. You don't know that, fair point." April brought warmth and rain, the world exploding into green. They worked the fields together, Henry guiding the plow while Draka walked behind, breaking up clods and picking stones. It was back-breaking work, but satisfying in a way that went bone deep. This was their land, their future, taking shape under their hands. Evenings, they were too tired for much beyond eating and sleeping, but they made time for small intimacies. Draka would wash Henry's hair, her strong fingers massaging his scalp until he nearly purred. He'd rub her shoulders, working out the knots from the day's labor. They fell into bed exhausted and woke tangled together, warm and content. One morning in late April, Draka woke him with unusual seriousness. "Henry, we need to talk." He sat up, instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. But there's something you should know. Someone's coming." "How do you know?" "I heard them, or rather I felt them. There's a warrior approaching, moving with purpose. They'll be here by midday." Henry trusted her instincts completely. Friendly or hostile, unknown. "But they're orc and they're looking for something, or someone." She met his eyes. "I think they're looking for me." They prepared carefully. Henry made sure his old army sword was clean and ready, though he hoped they wouldn't need it. Draka armed herself properly for the first time since autumn, strapping on her sword and checking its edge. They went about the morning chores with watchful tension, and just after noon, a figure appeared at the edge of the property. The approaching orc was male, tall and broadly built, with skin a darker green than Draka's and tusks that curved prominently from his lower jaw. He wore traveling leathers and carried a massive war axe across his back. He stopped at the boundary cairn and called out in the orc language, his voice carrying clearly. Draka answered in the same tongue, a short exchange that Henry couldn't follow. Then she said in human speech, "He wants to speak with me, with both of us. He says he means no harm, but he's here to issue challenge." "Challenge for what? For me?" Henry's jaw tightened. "Tell him to come forward. We'll hear him out." The orc warrior approached with confident strides, stopping a respectful distance from where they stood by the cabin. Up close, Henry could see he was perhaps 30, scarred and hard-eyed but not cruel. He inclined his head to Draka, then to Henry, a gesture of acknowledgement. "I am Grath Ironhide," he said, his human speech heavily accented but clear. "I come seeking Draka Ashforge, who was bound by warrior's debt to this man. I am here to challenge for the debt, to take it upon myself." "The debt is released," Draka said flatly. "I am free." Grath's eyes narrowed. "Released? By what right?" "By my right," Henry said. "I won the match. I can release the debt if I choose, and I did." "That's not how it works," Grath insisted. "The debt transfers only through death or defeat. It cannot simply be released." "I don't care how it's supposed to work," Henry said. "Draka is free. She stays here by her own choice, not because of any debt." Grath looked between them, and understanding dawned in his expression. "Ah, so that's how it is. The human claims you for his mate, not his servant." "I claim myself," Draka said, steel in her voice. "But yes, Henry is my partner. We are bound by choice, not law." Grath was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Among our people that makes no difference. If you are his, then I challenge him for you. Formal combat, witnessed and binding. If I win, you come with me. If he wins, I leave and never return." No, Draka said immediately. I'm not a prize to be fought over. I've made my choice. The old laws destroyed my clan. Draka's voice cracked like a whip. The old laws left me alone and wandering. I've found a new life here, Grath. A good life. I won't let you take it from me. Then what would you have me do? I've traveled a month to find you, following rumors and whispers. I've come to offer you a place in my clan to restore your honor. My honor is my own, Draka said, and it's intact. Henry had been listening carefully, piecing together what was happening beneath the words. Grath, he said quietly. Why are you really here? The orc warrior looked at him, surprised by the question. I told you, to challenge for the debt. No, why are you really here? Grath's jaw worked. Then slowly, I knew Draka's father. We were shield brothers before the clan wars. When I heard she survived, heard she was bound to some human in the borderlands, I thought I could bring her home. Give her back what was lost. Draka's expression softened. Grath, that's kind, truly. But I can't go back. There's nothing to go back to. There could be. My clan would welcome you. We're small, but we're strong. You could have family again. I have family. Draka moved to stand beside Henry, taking his hand. Right here. Grath looked at their joined hands, then at their faces. Whatever he saw there made his shoulders slump. You really love him. I do. And you, human, you love her more than anything, Henry said. Grath sighed, deep and long. Then I have traveled a month for nothing. But he didn't sound angry, just tired. I cannot challenge for someone who doesn't wish to be claimed. That would be abduction, not honor. Stay for a meal, Henry offered. Rest before you travel back. You've come a long way and the road is hard. Grath looked surprised. You would offer me hospitality after I came to take your woman. You meant no harm, and any friend of Draka's father is welcome at my fire. The big orc studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. I will stay, but only for a meal. I have my own journey to make. They fed him well. A stew thick with vegetables and meat, fresh bread, the last of the maple syrup on porridge for dessert. Grath ate with the appreciation of someone who'd been living on travel rations, and between bites, he told them about his clan, about the mountains they called home. We are rebuilding, he said, slowly. The wars took much from everyone, but we endure. It's what we do. I'm glad, Draka said, truly, and I thank you for thinking of me. It means more than you know. Your father would want you happy and safe. I can see you are both. Grath looked at Henry. You're braver than most humans to love an orc openly. I'm not brave. I'm just done pretending that other people's opinions matter more than my own happiness. Grath laughed at that, a booming sound. Well said. Perhaps the world would be better if more people thought that way. As the sun began to set, Grath prepared to leave. He clasped forearms with Draka in the warrior's farewell, then offered the same to Henry, who took it without hesitation. Treat her well, Grath said quietly, or I may come back. I will. You have my word. Grath nodded, satisfied. Then he shouldered his pack and his axe and walked away into the gathering dusk, his figure growing smaller until the trees swallowed him. Draka leaned against Henry and he wrapped his arm around her. Thank you, she said, for standing with me, for not deciding for me. Always, Henry said. It's your life, Draka, your choice. They stood together, watching the last light fade, and Henry felt the rightness of it settle into his bones. This was his life now. This woman, this land, this future they were building together. And whatever challenges came, they'd face them together. Spring ripened into early summer. The fields greened with new crops, the garden flourished under Draka's care, and the chickens Draka had brooded hatched into a scrambling mass of chicks that grew with astonishing speed. Henry bartered for a young cow at a neighboring homestead, a gentle brown creature Draka named Brownie with no imagination whatsoever. She's brown, Draka said when Henry pointed this out. It makes sense. You could call her anything, flower, dancer, queen, but she's brown. Brownie the cow integrated into their small farm with minimal fuss, providing milk that Draka turned into butter and cheese. The cheese was rough at first, more enthusiastic than skilled, but by the third batch, it was genuinely good. They fell into the rhythms of the farming year, the endless cycle of planting and tending and harvesting. It was hard work, but it was good work, and doing it together made it better. They talked while they worked, sharing stories and thoughts in comfortable silences. At night, they fell into bed exhausted and happy and woke to do it all again. In late June, Henry brought up the fair again. "It's next month. We should decide if we're going." Draka was quiet, pulling weeds from the bean rows. "Finally," she said, "I want to go. I want to walk in there with you openly and let everyone see that we're together, but I'm afraid of what people will say, of what they might do to you because of me." Henry knelt beside her in the dirt, taking her hands. "Listen to me, I'm not afraid. And if anyone has a problem, they'll have to go through me first. I'm not ashamed of loving you, Draka. I'm proud. I want the whole world to know." Her eyes searched his face. "You really mean that? Every word?" She kissed him then, there in the garden with dirt on their knees and the sun beating down. When they broke apart, she was smiling. "All right. We'll go to the fair, together." The decision made, they planned accordingly. They had surplus to sell: cheese, eggs, vegetables, and honey from the wild hives Henry had found and carefully harvested. They'd make a good showing, and if people talked, well, let them talk. July brought the fair, and with it, a test of Henry's confident words. They loaded the wagon with their goods and made the 2-day journey, camping overnight in the same clearing they'd used the year before. This time, they shared a tent. Draka curled against Henry's side, and he thought about how different everything was from a year ago. "Nervous?" he asked her quietly. "Terrified," she admitted, "but I'm not backing down. That's my girl." They arrived at the fair in the early afternoon, the grounds already crowded with people and animals and noise. Henry secured a spot in the vendor area, and they set up their table, arranging their goods with care. Almost immediately, people began to notice. The looks started, some curious, some disapproving, some outright hostile. Henry ignored them all, calling out his wares with the same casual confidence he'd use anywhere. Draka stood beside him, chin high, her hand occasionally finding his. Their first customer was an older woman who looked at Draka for a long moment, then said, "Is that goat cheese?" "Cow's milk," Draka said. "Made fresh last week. I'll try a round." The cheese was good enough that the woman bought 3 rounds and told her friends. By late afternoon, they'd sold half their stock, and the hostile looks had faded into background noise. People cared more about quality goods at fair prices than they did about who was selling them, it seemed. As the sun began to set, a familiar figure approached their table. Marcus Webb, the neighbor who'd gotten Henry into the wrestling match last year, stood looking sheepish and uncertain. "Henry," he said, "Miss Draka, I wanted to apologize. For last year, I was drunk and stupid and I put you in an awkward position." "Water under the bridge, Marcus," Henry said. "I also wanted to say," Marcus glanced around, then lowered his voice. "My wife and I, we think it's good what you're doing. Standing together like this, it takes courage. We respect that." Draka smiled, genuine and warm. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Other people approached as the evening went on, some to buy, some just to look, some to offer quiet words of support or encouragement. Not everyone was kind. There were whispers and sneers and one man who spat on the ground near their table, but there was more acceptance than hostility. More curiosity than fear. That night they celebrated by walking through the fair together, hand in hand. They watched the fire dancers, listened to the musicians, ate fried dough dusted with sugar. Draka pulled Henry into the dancing circle, and they spun and stomped with everyone else, laughing and breathless. Walking back to their tent later, Draka said, "That wasn't as bad as I feared. No, people surprise you sometimes. You surprised me. From the very start, you keep surprising me." Henry squeezed her hand. "Good surprises, I hope. The very best." They spent the next day selling the rest of their goods and purchasing what they needed for the coming year. Draka insisted on stopping by the wrestling ring, where a new group of fighters were taking challenges. The orc woman from last year was gone, moved on to other fairs and other roads. "You miss it?" Henry asked. "The traveling, the fighting?" Draka considered. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it, but no, I don't miss the loneliness. I don't miss having no place to call home." She looked at him. "I'm where I want to be." They left the fair on the third day, their wagon loaded with supplies and a few extras, glass jars for preserving, a new axe head, fabric for winter clothes. The journey home felt shorter than the journey out, and when they crested the last hill and saw the cabin in the valley below, Draka let out a happy sigh. "There it is. Home." "Home," Henry agreed. Summer rolled on, long days of work and short nights of rest. The crops grew tall and strong. The garden produced more than they could eat, so Draka learned to preserve, filling jars with pickles and jams and vegetables in brine. The chickens flourished, and they traded eggs with the few neighbors within reasonable distance for things they couldn't produce themselves. In August, on a day so hot they worked only in the early morning and late evening, Draka brought up something that had clearly been on her mind. "Henry, I've been thinking about the future, about our future." They were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set, cold water in their cups and a breeze finally bringing relief from the heat. Henry turned to look at her. "All right, what about it?" "I want to build something lasting, not just the farm, but a family, children if you're willing, a legacy." Henry's heart kicked hard in his chest. "Children. I know it's complicated. Half-orc children face their own challenges, but I think we could give them a good life here. Teach them to be strong and kind. Show them that love matters more than what people think." "I'd like that," Henry said slowly. "I'd like that a lot." Draka's face lit up. "Really, really. I want a future with you, Draka, all of it. The farm, the family, growing old together. Everything." She kissed him as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, and they held each other as the stars came out, planning and dreaming and hoping. The harvest came in strong that year, the barns and cellars filling with the fruits of their labor. They worked from dawn until well after dark, bringing in the grain and the last of the garden vegetables, preparing for winter. It was exhausting, but there was deep satisfaction in seeing the results of their work. When the last sheaf was stored and the field stood empty, they allowed themselves a day of rest. They slept late, ate a leisurely breakfast, and spent the afternoon doing nothing more strenuous than walking the property and admiring what they'd built. "Next year will be even better," Draka said, standing at the edge of the north field. "We'll have this whole section planted. Maybe start clearing the west section too. You're ambitious." "I've got energy to burn and a good partner. Why not be ambitious?" She grinned at him. "Besides, if we're going to have children, we need to make sure this place can support them." Henry pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "We'll make it work. Whatever comes, we'll make it work." Autumn brought the first frost, then the first snow, the year turning full circle. They prepared for winter with the ease of practice now, everything ready before the deep cold set in. The cabin was warm and tight, the barns full, the animals settled. On a quiet evening in November, almost exactly a year since Draka had first come to the farm, she made an announcement that changed everything. "I'm pregnant." Henry, who'd been adding wood to the fire, nearly dropped the log. "What? I'm pregnant. About 2 months along, I think. I wanted to be sure before I told you." He crossed to her in 3 long strides, taking her hands. "Are you all right? How do you feel? Do you need anything? Should you be sitting down?" Draka laughed, the sound bright with joy. "I'm fine. Pregnant, not fragile, but yes, I could sit down." "Come sit with me." They sat together on the bench, Henry's hand on Draka's still flat stomach, both of them grinning like fools. "A baby," Henry said, wonder in his voice. "We're going to have a baby. We are. Are you happy?" Happy doesn't cover it. I don't have words. He gave up on words and kissed her instead, pouring everything he felt into it. When they broke apart, Draka was crying happy tears that she didn't bother wiping away. "I was afraid you might have doubts about bringing a half-orc child into the world." "No doubts," Henry said firmly. "None. This child is going to be loved and wanted and raised right. That's all that matters." They sat together, making plans and dreaming dreams, while outside the first snow of winter began to fall. The winter months brought changes as Draka's pregnancy progressed. She remained active, insisting on doing her share of the work, though Henry found himself hovering and worrying in ways that made her laugh. "I'm not made of glass," she said, carrying firewood that he thought was too heavy. "I know. But let me worry. It makes me feel useful." She let him worry, indulging his protective instincts with patient affection. As her belly grew, she moved with the same grace but a new caution, one hand often resting on the growing life within her. They prepared the loft for a nursery, Henry building a cradle from seasoned maple and Draka sewing tiny clothes from soft fabric. They argued good-naturedly about names, collecting favorites and discarding others, nothing quite feeling right yet. In February, Draka woke Henry in the middle of the night, her hand gripping his shoulder. "Henry, something's wrong." He was awake instantly. What's happening?" "Pain, sharp pain. There's blood." Henry's heart dropped into his stomach. The nearest midwife was a day's ride away, and the snow was too deep for quick travel. "Tell me what to do." "I don't know." For the first time since he'd known her, Draka sounded truly frightened. "I don't know what's happening." They spent the longest night of Henry's life together. Draka curled on the bed, gritting her teeth through waves of pain, Henry helpless and terrified beside her. He did what he could, brought cold cloths, held her hand, whispered reassurances he didn't feel. By dawn, the pain had eased, but the bleeding hadn't stopped entirely. Draka lay pale and exhausted, her hand on her belly. "I think it's over," she whispered. "I think I lost the baby." Henry felt something crack inside his chest. "No, you don't know that." "I know." The midwife confirmed it 3 days later when Henry managed to get her to the farm. A miscarriage, common enough, nothing anyone could have done. The baby was gone. They grieved separately and together, each processing the loss in their own way. Draka withdrew into herself, quiet and distant. Henry threw himself into work, chopping firewood until his hands bled and his shoulders screamed. At night, they held each other and didn't speak of the future. It was Marcus Webb who, stopping by in early March with a lone tool, sat Henry down and spoke plainly. "I lost 2 before my eldest was born," he said. "It's hard, harder than most people understand, but it doesn't mean you can't try again, and it doesn't mean you failed. It feels like failure. I know, but grief isn't failure. It's love with nowhere to go. Give it time. Give yourselves time." Henry carried those words back to Draka that evening. They sat by the fire and he told her what Marcus had said. "I keep thinking I should have done something different," Draka said quietly. "Worked less, rested more, something." The midwife said there was nothing you could have done. "Sometimes these things just happen." "I know, but knowing doesn't stop the feeling." "No, it doesn't." Henry took her hand. "But we'll get through it, together. And when we're ready, if you want to try again, we'll try again." Draka leaned into him, and they sat in silence, the grief still raw but no longer quite so isolating. Spring came slowly, the world greening while they healed. They worked the fields together, planting with hope if not quite joy. The rhythms of the farm life helped, the endless cycle of seasons and tasks pulling them forward. In May, Draka started smiling again. Small smiles at first, then larger ones. She laughed at something silly Henry did, and the sound was like sunshine after rain. "I think I'm ready," she said one evening, "to try again, if you are." Henry pulled her close. "I am. Whenever you're ready, I'm ready." That night they loved each other with tenderness and hope, and in the quiet after, Draka whispered, "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." "Always together," Henry agreed. The summer passed in hard work and careful hope. They didn't speak of pregnancy, didn't want to jinx it, but Henry noticed when Draka's cycle didn't come. Noticed when she started looking green in the mornings. Noticed when her hand went to her belly in moments of quiet thought. In August, she confirmed it. "I'm pregnant again." This time, the joy was tempered with caution. They celebrated quietly, privately. Draka reduced her workload without being asked, and Henry hired help from the neighboring farms for the harvest. They took no chances, risked nothing. The pregnancy progressed, each week a small victory. Draka bloomed, her skin glowing, her energy returning. By autumn, she was undeniably, beautifully pregnant, her belly round and firm, movement visible when the baby kicked. "Strong child," she said, laughing as a particularly vigorous kick made her wince. "Going to be a fighter." "Takes after the mother," Henry said, his hand on her stomach, feeling the flutter of life beneath. Winter came, and they hunkered down for the waiting. Draka was huge now, uncomfortable and impatient, counting down the weeks. Henry was a nervous wreck, though he tried to hide it. The midwife, warned well in advance, promised to come at first word. In late February, on a night when the moon was full and bright, Draka woke Henry with a calm pronouncement. "It's time." Henry sent the neighbor's boy, paid to wait nearby for exactly this purpose, racing off to fetch the midwife. Then he helped Draka prepare, his hands shaking, his heart pounding. "Breathe," Draka said, amused despite the pain. "You're not the one giving birth." "I know. But I'm allowed to be nervous." The midwife arrived within 2 hours, a capable older woman named Sarah who delivered half the babies in the region. She examined Draka, pronounced everything normal, and settled in to wait. The labor was long. Draka bore it with the same stubbornness she brought to everything, gritting her teeth and breathing through contractions. Henry held her hand, whispered encouragement, brought water when she asked. He felt useless and terrified and desperately in love. As dawn broke, painting the cabin in shades of pink and gold, their son was born. He came into the world squalling and red-faced, strong and healthy and perfect. The midwife cleaned him, wrapped him in soft cloth, and placed him in Draka's arms. "He's beautiful," Draka whispered, tears streaming down her face. Henry, looking at his son could only nod, overcome. The baby had Draka's green skin, just a shade lighter, and Henry's gray eyes. Tiny tusks were just visible when he yawned. He was small and perfect, and theirs. "What shall we name him?" Draka asked. They discussed names endlessly, but nothing had felt right until this moment. Henry looked at his son, at the new life they'd created, and the name came clear. "Ewan," he said. "Ewan Patterson." Draka smiled, testing the name. "Ewan, yes, that's right." Little Ewan Patterson settled into their lives with surprising ease. He was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his mother's stubbornness and his father's quiet temperament. Draka took to motherhood with the same fierce devotion she brought to everything, and Henry discovered depths of love he hadn't known existed. The spring planting happened around the baby's schedule, one of them always near while the other worked. The neighbors helped more than Henry had expected, bringing food and offering labor and advice. Marcus Webb's wife came to visit, bringing gifts and sharing the hard-won wisdom of someone who'd raised 4 children. "They grow so fast," she said, holding Ewan with practiced ease. "Enjoy every moment, even the hard ones." Summer brought Ewan's first smiles, then his first laughs, sounds that made both Henry and Draka melt every time. They took him everywhere, Draka carrying him in a sling against her chest while she worked the garden, Henry holding him while he mended fences. Ewan seemed to thrive on the attention, growing sturdy and bright-eyed. In October, when Ewan was 8 months old, Draka made another announcement: "I'm pregnant again." Henry's eyes went wide. Already," she laughed at his expression. "What, you thought we'd stop at 1? "No, that was fast. We're building a family. Might as well get on with it." This pregnancy was easier, perhaps because they knew what to expect, perhaps because Draka's body had done this before. She worked through it, chasing after an increasingly mobile Ewan while her belly grew. Henry watched her with awe, this woman who'd come into his life through a wrestling match and who now anchored his entire world. Their daughter was born in early summer, 2 years after they'd first met at the fair. She came faster than Ewan had, born in the early morning with the birds singing outside. She had her mother's black hair and her father's features, with skin a beautiful shade of green somewhere between her parents' tones. "Sigrid," Draka said, "the name decided long ago. Sigrid Patterson." Henry held his daughter, this tiny perfect person, and felt his heart expand impossibly further. "Hello, Sigrid. Welcome to the family." With 2 children, life became louder, messier, and infinitely richer. Ewan toddled around the farm, investigating everything with fierce curiosity. Sigrid proved to have her mother's temper, letting the world know immediately when she was displeased. Henry and Draka navigated it together, learning as they went, making mistakes and fixing them. The farm prospered. With hired help and careful management, they expanded steadily. The west field was cleared and planted. They added more chickens, another cow, and a pair of pigs. The cabin was expanded, a new room added for the children, though for now they slept in the cradles Henry built. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep, Henry and Draka would sit on the porch and watch the stars. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence. Always, Draka's hand would find Henry's, their fingers lacing together in a grip that spoke of partnership and love and the life they'd built. "Do you ever regret it?" Draka asked one night. "Taking me in, all of this?" Henry didn't even have to think. Not for a single moment. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me. You and the children, you're my whole world. You're mine, too. I didn't know I could be this happy, didn't know life could be like this. It almost wasn't, if I hadn't taken that stupid wrestling challenge, but you did. And you won. And here we are." She squeezed his hand. "I'm glad I lost that match, Henry. It was the best loss of my life." He kissed her then, sweet and soft, years of love in it. When they broke apart, Sigrid was crying inside, and they both laughed. "Duty calls," Draka said, rising. "I'll go." "You got her last time." They moved through the evening routine with practiced ease, tending their children, banking the fire, preparing for the next day. And when they finally climbed into their bed, exhausted and happy, they fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, the future stretching bright before them. The years that followed were full of work and joy, challenge and triumph. They watched their children grow, teaching them to read and work and love. They expanded the farm, built a proper forge where Henry taught Ewan blacksmithing. Draka taught Sigrid to garden and fight, skills equally important. The neighbors became friends, and the whispers about the orc woman and the quiet farmer faded into acceptance and respect. On their 5th anniversary of the day they'd met, Henry took Draka back to the fair. Ewan was 4, Sigrid nearly 3, both old enough to enjoy the experience. They walked through the grounds as a family, the children wide-eyed at the sights and sounds. The wrestling ring was there, as always, with new fighters taking challenges. Henry and Draka stood watching, their children between them, and shared a knowing smile. "Want to go around?" Draka teased. "For old time's sake, absolutely not. I learned my lesson." "What lesson?" "That losing to you was the smartest thing I ever did." She laughed, bright and free, and kissed him right there in the crowd, not caring who saw. The children made exaggerated, disgusted sounds, and they laughed harder. They returned to their farm as the sun set, the wagon loaded with treats and trinkets for the children. Pulling up to the cabin, seeing the fields they'd worked and the life they'd built, Henry felt a peace settle deep in his bones. This was his legacy. Not the land or the crops or the buildings, but the love they'd created. The family they'd built against all odds. The partnership that had started with a wrestling match and grown into something neither of them could have imagined. Draka caught his eye and smiled, understanding without words the way she always did. He smiled back, and together they lifted their children down from the wagon and walked into their home, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. Together, always together, as it had been from the start. As it would be until the end.